Reporting that brings you the world.
This is a pretty dangerous trip.
Security in Beirut is tight.
More reporters.
They don't have to take the fight to Al-Shabaab.
More bureaus, more stories.
This is where the typhoon came ashore.
Giving you a real quote.
Al Jazeera, Nairobi.
On the Turkey-Syria border.
Venezuela, Beijing.
Kabul.
Hong Kong.
Ukraine.
The Arctic.
Real reporting from around the world. This is what we do. Al Jazeera America.
America is in the middle of an energy boom that many predict will last for decades. According to the Department of Energy, natural gas production will rise by 56% between 2012 and 2040. That spike will be due in part to advances in technology. New drilling techniques will allow companies to access reserves that were once out of reach, some of them in some pretty surprising places. David Schuster has the story.
This may look like your normal airport, but Pittsburgh International is anything but normal. Situated within the mineral-rich Marcellus Shale Formation, the airport is practically floating atop a fortune of natural gas reserves. Earlier this year, Allegheny County signed an open-ended lease with Consol Energy to drill for natural gas on airport grounds. The county expects to collect $500 million over the next 20 years. That's about $25 million a year. Rich Fitzgerald is executive of Allegheny County, which owns the airport.
Consol is going to spend about $500 million in building out the infrastructure needed for the airport property. The drilling, the pipe work, the engineering, the excavation, etc. When you add that to the royalties, we have $1 billion deal, $1 billion development without any tax dollars going into it. It's a pretty much a win-win for the community.
That deal could not have come at a better time. In 1987, Pittsburgh International made $1 billion gamble of its own, partnering with U.S. Air on an expansion project designed to handle 30 million passengers a year. But traffic peaked at less than 21 million in 1997. And in 2002, U.S. Air, by then rebranded as U.S. Airways, filed for bankruptcy. The next year, the airline broke its lease, leaving airport officials holding the bag.
What it meant was we didn't have the money coming in from all the airline operations to pay off the debt of our airport. This is a source of revenue from the extraction of the natural gas that will help pay down that debt.
Consol officially broke ground on its first drilling site Monday. Located just outside the airport fence, it will bore more than a mile deep to extract the natural gas. It can even drill horizontally, sucking up deposits from beneath active runways. Airport officials insist it's safe, with all flights and runways operating as usual. Despite the use of a controversial method called hydraulic fracturing or fracking, the project faced little opposition from the local community. It may have helped that Pittsburgh is not the first airport to double as a fracking site. Both Denver International Airport and Dallas-Fort Worth are home to dozens of wells. They have been for years. But each operation brings in less than $10 million a year, a drop in the bucket compared to Pittsburgh's annual $25 million windfall. In addition to paying off its debt, Pittsburgh International plans to invest some of its newfound riches back into the airport. Its goal, to attract more airlines with lower costs. But with the natural gas deal under its belt, the airport hopes to diversify even more.
Of those 9,000 acres that we own out at the airport, we are developing those for commercial development, office space, research and development, distribution centers, and we're able to use that money to build out the infrastructure that's creating jobs for the residents of this region.
David Schuster, Al Jazeera.
Well, fracking, especially under an active runway, may be one of the more eye-popping examples of airport diversification, but it is a trend happening around the country. From warehouse space to hotel chains, airports are putting their assets to use with business opportunities that are well outside the aviation industry. At Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, there's even an apiary, one that houses 75 beehives with over 1 million bees. Michael Weber is president of Weber Air Cargo, a global consulting firm that helps airports plan for their cargo needs on a day-to-day basis or even 20 or 30 years down the road. He says a diversified portfolio makes sense for an airport just like it does for us. Michael, Pittsburgh Airport's business doesn't stop with just leasing out this fracking area. They're leasing out some of their land to Shell Oil. What's Shell doing there?
Well, the thing is, airports have long served, as economic engines for their communities. And you look at Shell, for example, one of the top commodities that goes by air is your high-value, low-weight goods. And oil field equipment, energy equipment has always been a significant portion of that. Again, it's high-value, low-weight goods, whether it be oil field, seismic equipment, of course. You don't ship things by air unless they, justify the additional cost. It's the most expensive mode of shipping, and so oil field equipment has always been, sort of a bread and butter commodity. Pharmaceuticals are another one that, a lot of airports are looking at means of bringing in. So, listening to the lead-in, I mean, Pittsburgh is not your ordinary airport in that they've had some particularly challenging times with having had the U.S. Airways hub closed, but on the other hand, it's also not a model that can be replicated too many times because not everybody's sitting on a shale reserve like that.
What are some of the, if you can't lease out your land for shale, what are some of the better examples that you've seen of airports sort of partnering with other enterprises to make better use of their land and generate some revenue?
Well, sure. I mentioned earlier pharmaceuticals, and that's a particularly hot one right now because, what has happened, and U.S. Airways at Pittsburgh is a great example, but there's many of them, is, there's a lot of carriers that were around, say, 15 years ago that you used to see a lot of planes for, including all cargo carriers like Bax Global and Emery Worldwide who've gone out of business. And so what's happened is the airports have a lot fewer prospects among the traditional airlines. And so they're having to go after the demand drivers, the folks who put the people on the planes and put the cargo in the bellies of the planes. And so pharmaceuticals is one that has shown a lot of, durability to it. And so what you're starting to see now is, maybe some of the pharmaceutical producers, as well as things like organ banks, things like that are very time sensitive and a lot less cost conscious, that are starting to look at going onto airports and places, with refrigerated facilities. Used to be primarily about fruits, vegetables, and cut flowers, and now they're looking a lot more at pharmaceuticals and other organ banks, things like that. Is there
any benefit to flyers and residents around the airport to this diversification?
There's a derived benefit, certainly in an extraordinary case like Pittsburgh, where they went from 20 million passengers a year down to 8 million. Airports operate in a closed funding loop, and so any money that they're able to raise on the revenue side allows them to decrease their cost to the airlines, who are their principal tenants. And so these types of non-aeronautical revenues that will increase the revenue side of the ledger do allow them to potentially lower their costs in terms of rents for the passenger terminal gates and landing fees for the aircraft as well. So in that sense, it makes one airport more competitive against another one. And so in that sense, for the local flyer, it certainly does.
Michael, good to talk to you. Great conversation. Michael Weber is the president of Weber Air Cargo. Sunday's earthquake was a wake-up call for California's Napa wineries. I'm going to look at investing in an earthquake protection system coming up.